Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session where we're going to talk about building professional low-code apps with Microsoft Power Apps. Before we get started, I'm just going to introduce myself. So I'm Aaron Gumbs, and I'm one of the Dynamics 365 customer engagement team managers here at Quantic. And we look after a team of just over 20 people, and we work with everything in the customer engagement and Power App space. My personal experience is around 9 years or just over 9 years worth of experience with the Power Platform and what was Dynamics 365 and Dynamics CRM. And I started with Dynamics CRM 2011 on premise and ADX Studios portals, and I've worked with all versions of the product since then. Today, I primarily consult in products that are based on Microsoft Dataverse and focus on repeatable and extendable deliverables. So, what I mean by that is we make sure we get the best of technology by making sure we can implement a business process in a product rather than trying to squeeze someone into technology for the sake of doing so. On today's agenda, we're going to talk about an overview of Power Apps and Microsoft Dataverse before we get started. We're then going to look at how we choose the right application when we're looking at the Power Platform. We'll give you an idea of what you can do through some screenshots and capabilities of Quantic's Citizen Portal, and we'll also show you what we mean by single sources of truth and kind of wrap that around to talk about Microsoft Dataverse again. So, high level overview, an understanding of Microsoft Cloud terminology and what are Power Apps and why is Microsoft Dataverse so important. When we're talking about the Power Platform, we're really talking about these services on the right hand side. So, Microsoft Dataverse is the underlying data structure that can be used across multiple products and feature sets and services within the Power Platform. It includes tables, columns, rows, and they can all be used in Power Apps. And it can interact with external data sources through Power Automate. We can also surface data to external end users as well. So we can do that via Power Apps portals, which is one of the types of Power Apps that we have. And then, of course, we can also use the data for reporting in Power BI. And we can also surface some of that data dynamically based on questions and knowledge that is coming through on Power Virtual Agents. Now, specifically for this session, we'll focus on Dataverse and how Power Apps can help us perform some of the business processes that we want to, but we also have the ability to look at third-party services as well. So they would normally be done via the data connectors that we have available to us, provided by Microsoft. We also have an AI builder that helps us repeat activities without any manual intervention from an end user. Today, we're specifically going to look at the second service in that diagram, but there'll be other sessions that will be looking more specifically at Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agents. So looking at Microsoft Cloud terminology in terms of Power Apps and Dataverse rather than the Power Platform as a whole, we're looking at Power Apps and there's three different types of forms and they're all cloud-based. Microsoft provide a series of pre-built Power Apps. They are in templates, accelerators, and Dynamics 365 applications. So depending on how much you're licensed for, and also what you want to achieve as well, will also depend on how much you get started with. So you could start from scratch with absolutely nothing except a core data model with some standard tables provided by Microsoft. Or you could purchase one of the more premium licenses for something for Dynamics 365, and you have a fully fledged business process that's already been created for you. And it's more about adapting the process rather than creating it from scratch. They're also built to be responsive. So on any device browser, in the cloud, on desktop, we always expect to be able to access these Power Apps in some way, shape, or form. Now, there are some caveats around offline capability and mobile capability, and we'll look at those at a high level as we move through this presentation. So, Power Apps and Dataverse in context. As we said earlier, we have three types of Power Apps, and the first one we have is a model-driven app or a model-driven application. The idea of a model-driven application came from the original Dynamics CRM interface that was used many years ago and how it's evolved over time and moved onto the cloud. But effectively, we can create a Power App with its own custom sitemap through the model-driven app functionality, and they're really ideal for desk-based users. The model driven app allows us to show lots of data in a very consistent way. We have the ability to show that data either at a high level where you can see multiple records, or we can see forms where we see one particular record's data in detail. And we also have the concept of a business process flow, which when we first put this presentation together was pretty much only contained within model driven applications, but you can also have them standalone now in Power Automate, which you'll hear about in the other presentation. As we said earlier, there are a series of pre-configured solutions to get started with. So when you're looking at a Dynamics 365 application, what you're actually doing is looking at a series of model-driven apps that have been configured in a particular way, but you can also create your own model-driven apps with their own sitemap too. The second type of Power App is a Canvas app. So the Canvas app is really ideal for users on the go. It has a fully customizable user interface and it's implemented using a PowerFX, which is an Excel-like programming language. Now, the great thing about a Canvas app, instead of on a model-driven app where the user interface is pretty much decided for you, apart from the form layout with the different fields, a Canvas app gives you full control over the user interface and you can have different components to display your data in a different way. So as you can see here, you can see we have a calendar picker on the left hand side, and then we have a series of drop downs and flip switches and things like that. That's not so easy to do on a model driven app. So you can imagine if you're on the go and you need a mobile or a tablet application, this can be a really useful way of displaying that data. What you can also do with Canvas apps is you can present them in a Power BI report so that you can modify and manipulate data as your report is processing that data. You can also embed Canvas apps inside model driven applications themselves. So if there's something where you do need a specific user interface or a specific control for a piece of data, you can actually store this as one part of your existing model driven application form. The last thing I'd say about Canvas apps is, although you start from scratch, you actually have a lot of ability to bring up to speed your application without too much coding required. The way I like to describe it to my team and clients is that if you're familiar with a VLOOKUP and you know how to create one of those using the references with Excel rather than asking one of your colleague, then you can probably have a pretty good stab at a Canvas application. And last but not least, we also have Power Apps portals. So Power Apps portals are ideal for external audiences. They are great for self-serving internal audiences, and they're great for partners as well. They're safe and secure. So when we're building a portal, we're thinking about the content that's going to be shown on the screen. We're not thinking about complex integration projects. And if any of you have delivered a project in the past, you'll know that when it comes to data migration and integration, that's often where the biggest risk is because it's the most complicated, it's the most bespoke, and therefore it also carries the most cost as well. As we discussed with the previous types of Power Apps, there are several pre-configured starter templates as well, so you can get started quickly without having to build a website from a blank canvas. Again, just to reiterate, Dataverse is really important in this process. So although Dataverse isn't a Power App, we think we should highlight it as with much as importance as a Power App as well. The Dataverse is effectively Microsoft's offering of a database-like service. So it's not a database in the sense that it's not just fields in tables with relationships. It's so much more. You have the ability to create views. You have the ability to create forms. You also have the ability to create business rules so that there's logic that interacts on the screen as your users are processing data. So all of that sits within Dataverse. And again, just like with Power Apps, it's all configurable too. Let's say, for example, you have a third-party service and you need to use one of the applications that have to use Microsoft Dataverse. You have the ability to create virtual entities or virtual tables. So by using virtual entities or virtual tables, you can bring data in from other sources. They look and feel like they're sourced in Dataverse, but actually they're still sitting in the third-party service. And last but not least, there's no integration required to be used in Power Apps at all. For some types of applications, you have to use a Dataverse connector and then you choose your data from there. But essentially, because it's a part of the Microsoft offering in the Power Platform, it works natively with all of your Power Apps. So we've looked at three different types of Power Apps. We've also got Dataverse as well. So how do I choose the right type of application when I'm looking at which Power Apps I should use in the Power Platform? First of all, we need to understand the functionality. Now, I'm not going to read through all of these one by one, but hopefully you can take a good look on the screen. And what you'll realize is there's certain caveats around particular points between all three of these applications. So, for example, if you wanted to use a product or an application with external audiences, you're going to find it very difficult to do that with a model driven app or a Canvas app unless you, for example, set them up in your Azure Active Directory, you treat them like internal users, and you license them in exactly the same way. So, for external audiences, you'd always use a portal. For offline capability, now a portal is a website, so it has no offline capability whatsoever, but Canvas apps and model driven apps do. So you can't provide an external service with offline capability, is what we're concluding here. However, we do have different things we can do for our internal users to make those functionalities available. And the last thing I'd say on this slide as well is that when we're talking about code and things like that, it's unlikely we'll need code for a model driven application because of the way that Microsoft have moved away from JavaScript and tried to implement business rules and business process flows and Power Automate. So that's great for us. It means that we can deliver the product quicker. With the Canvas app, we've already discussed that we need the PowerFX programming language. So it's likely to need code, but it's very, very simple. But then when we're talking about the portal product, we definitely need code because it's a website. It needs those technical developments such as HTML, CSS, something that's called Liquid as well that sits on top of the HTML, and other programming languages often associated with web development. We also need to consider licensing as well. So when we're looking at licensing, for example, the model driven and the Canvas app approach is per user per month in most cases. The reason I say most cases is because there is a per app license, and that is the lowest one that you can see on here. But essentially, you're licensing the user to be able to use that functionality in your Microsoft tenant. With the portal, it's slightly different. We have a per login per 24 hours or a per page view. They count towards a unit of some sort, and those units can be bought in the packages that are seen there. One thing I would say is this shows the minimum unit that you need to purchase, but actually when you look on Microsoft's website, they actually have 5 tiers of units, and the cost per login or the cost per view dramatically decreases as you go from 100 logins all the way to their top tier in tier 5, which you're looking at tens of thousands of logins. So now that we've looked at Power Apps and we understand when we might use a particular app, let's have a quick look at Quantix Citizen Portal. And I'm going to show you screenshots here just to make sure we can get through it in the right amount of time. So Quantix Citizen Portal is a way for citizens to connect with public sector organizations. It's industry specific, and it takes the example of a citizen that knows nothing about the technology and a council that really know their terminology around help desk support. So we need to make sure that we're distinguishing between language for the two different types of users. It currently utilizes every part of the Power Platform except for Power Virtual Agents. Now, this isn't because Power Virtual Agents cannot be integrated. It can. It's just because we didn't feel a need for it at this particular time. And the idea behind Quantix Citizen Portal is really proving the capability of all of the Power Platform. So first of all, we have a model-driven application. The model-driven app starts off with a dashboard, and the dashboard shows us all of our information in one place without having to go searching for it. So the great thing about this is it's not just the data that's been submitted by the citizen on the portal, it also shows our Google Analytics. So what we've been able to do is we take our Google authentication that we have using the Power BI desktop application, We've then taken some of the data from Google Analytics, published it in a report or a tile, and then we've used that Power BI tile in our model driven application dashboard. So the great thing here is that we're not just looking at first party application data here, we're also looking at third party data application data here as well. When you get into the model driven application, we keep our citizens at the core of this product. So we're using the contact table that's been created by the Power Platform and by Microsoft themselves, but we've created a household entity as well with household members. What this allows us to do is it allows us to record our individuals with their council tax numbers, their dates of birth, whether they're vulnerable, whether they're minors, etc., etc. And we're able to change the form based on who they are. And we can automatically calculate who's in a particular household based on a council tax number using Power Automate. So although you can't see it on the screen at the moment, one of the things that this does is if vulnerable or minor is ticked on this screen or it's flipped to yes, then it will actually make you type in a parent or guardian before you can actually save the record. So we're dynamically changing the form as we go through and process this data. We then have different categorizations for our issues and our requests. So earlier I mentioned the different terminology that we want to be able to use for various audiences. A citizen knows that their bin is damaged or it hasn't been collected. What they don't know is why an SLA is required or why a subject or a category is required on a case. So what we've done is we've created a request form. That is a table that sits in Dataverse, and we convert it into the case table that's been created by Microsoft in Dynamics 365 Customer Service. That gives the citizen the best ability to enter their data based on language that they know and categorizations that they know, but it also allows the council to be able to provide a help desk style support for residents. So they can use SLAs, queues, workload management, and everything else. We also have the reference data for the portal. So earlier we mentioned that Power App portals are configurable, and this is just one way that the Power App portal is configurable. On the screen, you'll see active QQ hour location. So that's just a name for a table in Dataverse. And what that does is that provides all of the locations that we look after at the council split by category. Because this is categorized and because it's just data in a table, what that means is that when they build new car parks or when they close one or when they close down the recycling center, it just means that they can do that by adding and removing data. They don't need to come back to Quantic to be able to deliver that change in functionality. So that's the model-driven application, and now we move on to the Canvas app. So earlier we mentioned that Canvas apps can be embedded into model-driven applications as well as being standalone. So this is just an example of information-only Canvas apps, and what this allows us to do is just understand when we're configuring a new portal web page, what page templates I should check and why I should use them. So the Power Apps portal, it has a visual editor, but there are some things you can't do in the visual editor. And one of those things would be working out exactly what the page template is going to do when you hit submit. So this embedded Canvas app just helps us understand that with a visual guide when you click on one of those page templates on the right hand side. Now, here's an example of a standalone Canvas app. So a standalone Canvas app is for someone that is on the go in this particular example. It's for someone that's acting on the lorries. So you can imagine they might be wearing gloves. They want big buttons. They want big kind of indications of what they need to do on the application. And they're also moving house by house as well. So on here, we automatically populate the date. We automatically populate the latitude and longitude because they might not necessarily know the address that the bin belongs to, but then they have the option to enter the address and other details as optional data if they do have that available to them. And then the great thing is that this scenario is for the person on the lorry. And on the portal, we have the citizen that might raise a bin issue as a resident, but all of that data feeds into the same table. And then we have the same consistent process for all of the help desk users on the back end. We then have the portal application, and this is where the residents would view or log in to see various pieces of data. You don't have to log in to use this portal. You can see public data, but then if you sign in, you get more of a unique experience to you as a person. So as you can see, this is the homepage, and we have this ability to register or sign in on the right hand side. We're not blocking people from seeing the homepage content if they're not signed in. It's entirely their choice. But if they do, like we said earlier, they'll get a personalized experience. The great thing about this homepage is that we're combining different Power Platform components that already exist. So, for example, what you can see on here at the moment is this list of hot topics. Those hot topics are coming from a table that already exists in Dataverse. And then we have the notifications at the top of the screen that are also coming from a different table in Dataverse. So a portal really is just a puzzle where we bring lots of different pieces together and we present them in a slightly different way in comparison to how we would on the model driven application or the Canvas application. And it just requires a slightly different technique because we're using web development techniques instead. What we've now got on the form here is, or on the screen here rather, is a form on the portal that allows us to submit data as a resident. So you can see by the top right hand side, I've signed in. What I'm doing here is I'm just going to the waste area in the services area, and I've said that I want to report a bin issue. Just like with the Canvas app, I've got a presentation of this particular Dataverse table. It's a slightly different presentation because we don't have latitude and longitude. We have other data, considering I'm going to be on a tablet or a desktop when I'm going to be reporting this. And also because I'm a resident, it's likely that I know my own address as well. So I can submit all of this data and it will go into the Dataverse table in the back end. The other thing that we needed to consider as well is, and I don't know if you feel this as a resident at your own homes, but when I personally log on to my council website, I don't necessarily think about checking my own progress of my own cases. I just want to tell them as there's a problem and I want that problem fixed. We will have varying levels of kind of audiences that want to see the granular detail compared to people like myself. So what we've done here is we've created a completely custom landing page for all of your different services to see a summary of all of these different issues. And what you can actually do is click on one of those tabs and it will take you back to your support area with all of your issues so that you can see those in detail. So that was the citizen portal. And again, as we said in the agenda earlier, I just want to kind of bring this full circle and think about the single sources of truth and why Dataverse is so important. So I just have one slide for you on this really, and this is just to emphasize how we're using different things in the Quantix citizen portal. So as you can see here, we have the contact, and from the council's point of view, the contact is the resident in the model-driven application who has raised the request or the case. But from the portal perspective, that is an authentication mechanism to say this is the resident that's trying to log in. When we look at the case table, for the model-driven app and the help desk service user, that is an issue that has been raised via a request and converted into a case so that I know what the categorization is and I know what the SLA should be. From the portal perspective, it's for the resident and they don't know that the case exists, but they do get a case reference number because all they did is submit the request details that had terminology that was specific to them. With the request itself, that's actually used by all three applications. So this is the source data or the raw data for the help desk user that has the converted case in front of them at the help desk. For the person on lorry, this is the data that they are submitting when we're automatically populating latitude and longitude and things like that. And for the resident, this is really the core of the functionality on the Power App portal. And then last but not least, locations. So locations drive where this issue goes to when the resident tells the council exactly what's going on. And it's really important for the on the go user to be able to kind of identify the location as well. Now, in the model driven application, there is an association with those locations. We don't lose that data when we're carrying out these cases or we're reporting, but actually it's not as important as it is in the Canvas app and the portal. So that's everything from me to give you an overview of the Power Platform and Dataverse and to bring you into the world of the Microsoft Cloud terminology. But before we go, I just wanted to raise that Bytes and Quantic offer an app in a day workshop to bring you up to speed with everything on the Power Platform. So, the App in a Day workshop is a 1 day workshop engagement. It requires that all people follow along during the session. It's a hands on session, it's not just us teaching you and you listening. And by doing that, we are going to go through all of the different elements of the Power Platform within the Power App space that will allow you to get started. So we do things like creating custom business applications and automated workflows or Power Automates. We look at the different pain points you might have in a scenario and how we could fix those with the Power Platform. And we also teach you how you could scale that application as well. If you'd like to hear more, then reach out to your Bytes account manager and they can give you more information on the cost and funding. But otherwise, you can contact Bytes more generically on tellmemore@bytes.co.uk, or you can use the phone number or the website that you see on your screen. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to pop those in and we will get back to you as soon as possible.